Hare Krishna. Good to see you all. Tonight, we are continuing with our study of Bhagavad Gita as it is by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And tonight, we will finish chapter 2. So we'll go from verses 59 to 72. And if you have any questions or comments as we go, then please ask. So we'll begin with text number 59. This is quite a famous verse, as many of the verses in this section are. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such an engagement by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. So, Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport, one who has tasted the beauty of Krishna in the course of his advancement in Krishna consciousness no longer has a taste for dead material things. So this is a very important point. This is actually the entire philosophy of the Hare Krishna movement, of the Krishna consciousness movement. Our philosophy is to receive a higher taste in Krishna consciousness. Param drishtva nivartate. Nivartate means you can give up, you can reject dead material things, as Prabhupada says in the purport, dead material things. Things that are made from the material energy have no attraction for someone who is tasting, as Prabhupada says in the purport, the beauty of Krishna. So I think we mentioned last week also, Srila Prabhupada said one time he was in an airport and the devotee said to Prabhupada, "What do you see when you look around the airport?" Because Prabhupada spent a lot of time in airports and many of us have spent time in airports. Prabhupada, what do you see when you look around? Prabhupada said, I see flapping dead bodies. In other words, there is lifelessness. Because the nature of the material energy is dead. It's made of innate matter. Right? It has no life, it has no consciousness. So because the material energy has no life and it has no consciousness, it is dead. Prabhupada's guru, Bhakti Saraswati Thakur, he explains that the material energy, it is dead, it is lifeless. Therefore, many people, for everyone in this material world, they will become unattracted by this material energy in due course of time. They'll think, what is the point of trying to enjoy in this material world? Because there's no energy, there's no life in matter. There's no pleasure in it. So he gives the example, Bhakti Saraswati Thakur says, just like a king may own an entire kingdom, but in due course of time, he will want to attack another kingdom and move there. Because even if he has a very opulent situation in this material world, a very satisfying situation in this material world, in due course of time, because the material energy is dead, one will become sick of it. And one will lose one's attraction, one will want to move on to something else. And we see that's what happens all over the world. People, they may be married, but people have affairs all the time. Why? Because the material energy is dead. So attraction to the material energy it can't satisfy the soul. And in due course of time, people become dissatisfied. They want to move on to the next thing. So this is common in the material world. So one who actually develops an attraction, as Prabhupada says in the purport, to the beauty of Krishna. Krishna's beauty is experienced in all features of his personality, his name, his form, his qualities and his pastimes, and his dharma and his associates. They are all attractive. So for a devotee loses attraction to this material energy once they have tasted or experienced the beauty of Krishna in these various forms. So we see that people in this material world, they become attached to this material energy. But a devotee, the more he cultivates his Krishna consciousness and his attraction to Krishna, the less attraction he has to this material world. He gives up the attraction. He loses his taste and his attraction to this material energy. One of the famous examples is in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, the Krishna book, that Rukmini, who was Krishna's principal wife in Dwaraka, she had never met Krishna. It's a very, very powerful example. She never met him, but she had just heard about him from the sage Narada and from others. And just by hearing about Krishna, she became attracted to his beauty. And she could think of nothing else but Krishna. So then she lost all attachment to everything in this world except for Krishna. And then eventually she was able to marry Krishna. And then one time Krishna said to her, he said, you could have married someone else. Shishupal, or one of the kings. There's so many powerful kings. Why didn't you marry one of them? Rukmini said, because how can I be attracted to a form or a body made of the material energy? How can I be attracted to it? One who is attracted to Krishna, to the spiritual energy, is not attracted to this, to the material world. She said, how can I be attracted when I'm attracted to your body, your form, which is such Chidananda Vigraha, which is full of eternality, knowledge, and bliss? How could I be attracted to material forms in this world? So this is self-realization. This is Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada says in the purport, therefore, sense restrictions by Ashtanga Yoga are there for the less intelligent neophytes. But restrictions are only good until one actually has a taste for Krishna consciousness. So until we have an actual taste for Krishna consciousness, we may have to mechanically control our senses. We may have to mechanically control our senses until we get an actual taste for Krishna consciousness. Right? There has to be some mechanical control. That's why we follow the 4 regulative principles. That's why we practice brahmacharya. That's why we do these things for that reason. So that we can gradually give up our taste for these material things. So it will take some time to give up our taste for the material things, and we may have to and systematically detach ourselves in the beginning, but in due course of time, when we become actually attracted to Krishna, we'll naturally give up these attachments to the material things in this world. right? When we develop our actual taste, we'll just become disinterested. And actually, Srila Prabhupada explains in the Krishna book, this is how we know if we are advancing in Krishna consciousness. Because when you are advancing in Krishna consciousness, then automatically you will feel your material desires going down and your desires for Krishna increasing. Prabhupada said that's the practical way of evaluating if we're advancing in Krishna consciousness. Are your material desires going down? Are your spiritual desires increasing? And we have to make sure that that's always taking place. Okay. Text number 60. The senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind even of a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. So now Krishna is instructing us to focus our mind and our senses in serving Krishna, right? This is the process of Krishna consciousness. Rishikena, Rishikesha, Sevana Bhakti Uchate. We purify our senses by engaging them in the service of Krishna. And by engaging our senses in the service of Krishna, we purify our senses. Our senses become purified in due course of time. So that is the system. The system is we engage in Krishna's service and our senses will become purified as time goes by. So Prabhupada says within the purport, without engaging the mind in Krishna, one cannot cease material engagements. You can only give up the lower things. You can only give up your attachment to sense gratification when you develop a taste and an attraction to the activities in Krishna consciousness. As Krishna says in this chapter, keep all material things far distant by devotional service. That is our philosophy. Keep all material things distant by engaging in devotional service. Prabhupada also says in the purport, many transcendentalists try to conquer the senses, but in spite of their endeavors, they sometimes fall victim to material sense enjoyment due to the agitated mind. So there are many famous examples. Sobari Muni, for example, right? He tried to control the senses. He was underwater, it says, for 60,000 years during austerity. Imagine during austerity. I mean, imagine practicing austerity for 6 minutes or 6 hours or 6 days or 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years. Even that's hard for us to practice austerity for an amount of time. But just imagine 60,000 years he was performing tapasya under the water, focusing, controlling his senses. And then he saw 2 fish copulating, 2 fish engaged in sex life. And just by seeing those fish, his mind became agitated. After 60,000 years of sense control and discipline, his mind became agitated and he went back to the shore, went back to land, and got married to many wives and had many children to fulfill those material desires. Right? So it's not easy to control the senses unless you have attraction to Krishna, unless you engage your senses in the service of Krishna. Right? It's not easy. That's why we are. That's why we are. It is recommended that we use our senses in the service of Krishna. Then we can control the senses. And actually, Mother Jagatarini, I remember she said many years ago, and it's something that stayed with me over the years. She said that for devotees, we need to fulfill our material desires. We all have material desires. And she made this point, it's very important. You need to fulfill them in Krishna's service. So if you need to get married, if you need to have children, if you need to, these are material desires. They're not spiritual desires. Getting married is not a spiritual desire. We need marriage as much as we need a material body, right? We don't need a material body, but we have one. We have material desires. So therefore, we get married, for example. We have children. These are material desires. But we can purify those desires by engaging those things in the service of Krishna. As Bhaktivinoda Thakur teaches us, we can engage our family members in the service of Krishna. And in that way, purify ourselves and them of our material attachments and material desires. Prabhupada also says in the purport that Krishna consciousness is such a transcendently nice thing that automatically material enjoyment becomes distasteful. Right? It's such a nice thing. It's so nice being a devotee of Krishna. And by being a devotee, you lose your attachment to the material energy, to the material world. Okay. Text number 61. One who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence. So Prabhupada explains in the purport that the highest conception of yoga perfection is Krishna consciousness. And unless one is Krishna conscious, it is not at all possible to control the senses. Not possible to control the senses. You see the example we're given, Saubhari Muni was not able to control his senses, even after many thousands of years of austerity. And then we're also given the example of Srila Haridas Thakur. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur was able to control his senses. Right? Even when Maya herself, when the opposite sex was tempting him and trying to attract him, he could not be attracted. Right? Because he had so much nama ruchi, so much taste for chanting the holy name of Krishna that there was no attraction to anything material in this world. So that is what we must emulate. That is what we must cultivate. That is what we must, the stage we must arrive at, where we have no attachment or attraction to anything in this world because we engage our senses in the service of the master of the senses. Prabhupada also says in the purport, one unnecessarily angry out of pride, cannot check his senses. On the other hand, a devotee silently tolerates all injustices and thereby emerges victorious. Right? It's a very important point. It's a very important point. That for a devotee is not attracted or attached to this material world. And he can tolerate all kinds of injustices. He's not attracted to the allurements of the opposite sex, name, fame, the opposite sex, right? Because the devotee has so much taste for Krishna consciousness. He can easily give up his attachment to these things. Prabhupada says, as a blazing fire burns everything within a room, Lord Vishnu, situated in the heart of the yogi, burns up all kinds of impurities. All kinds of impurities are burnt up. That's why, actually, Rupa Goswami explains, for devotional service to be truly effective, it must be performed with intensity. It's a very important point. It's something we have to understand as devotees. Sometimes we give the example, it's just like, if there's a fire, a campfire, and you've got your hands there and you're warming your hands, keeping your hands on the fire. That's nice. But that's like just coming around to the temple, to the Krishna consciousness movement, and just coming around and visit, just warming your hands, rubbing them, taking some prasadam, seeing the deities. It's all very nice, and then you leave. But if you really want to become purified, and this is something that every devotee has to decide upon in due course of time, if we really want to become purified as devotees, we have to dive into the fire, which of course you can't do in this world. You can't jump into the fire because you'll burn yourself. But, from the example is given that if you want to be purified of your impurities, you have to go into the fire. So as devotees, we have to do that, right? We have to dive in to surrendered service. As Krishna says at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, abandon everything and just surrender unto me, Sharana. So this is how you become purified as a devotee. You fully surrender to Krishna. You fully dive in and you surrender. So this is how we become purified as devotees. This is how we absorb ourselves in Krishna consciousness. Right? We have to surrender unto Krishna. Right? Which means diving into the fire. That's how the impurities are burnt up. Prabhupada says the Yoga Sutra also prescribes meditation on Vishnu and not meditation on the void. The so-called yogis who meditate on something which is not on the Vishnu platform simply waste their time in a vain search after some phantasmagoria. The aim of the real yoga is to become Krishna conscious. So the point is that we have to fix the mind on Krishna. I was discussing this just before when I was having dinner with my family, that so many other spiritual paths and religious paths, they focus on not serving the Supreme. They focus on serving something impersonal, as opposed to the personality of Krishna. So, as Prabhupada points out, this is phantasmagoria. It is not the real purpose of the yoga system. Raja Vijay Raja Guyam, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that the Bhakti yoga process is the supreme process of how to understand the supreme absolute truth. One must render service to Krishna to understand him. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Bhakcha mama vijanati yavanyas chasmi tattvataha. We must serve him in order to become purified. Verse number 62. Now, verses 62 and 63, once again, very well-known verses. There are many well-known verses in this section. So these verses should be meditated upon, learnt, and meditated upon by the devotees. Krishna is speaking these verses in order to lift us out of the material world. While contemplating the objects of the senses, a person becomes attached, develops attachment for them. And from such attachment, lust develops. And from lust, anger arises. So, very powerful verse, very powerful instruction. Prabhupada says in the purport, one who is not Krishna conscious is subjected to material desires while contemplating the objects of the senses. So this is what we do. People in the material world, they contemplate, they meditate on the objects of the senses. You know, the mind has three functions: thinking, feeling, and willing. These are the functions of the mind. Right? We think, then we start to feel about things, and then we will. When will it happen? So as devotees, you know, we all think of sense gratification sometimes, but you have to be careful about contemplating sense gratification within the mind. Because if you contemplate sense gratification, you develop attachment and you begin to feel in your mind what it's like. And then if you get to the feeling level, then what takes place then? Willing. You begin to will. Oh, I want this to happen. Right? And then once you get to that point, there's no turning back. It becomes very difficult. So thinking, feeling, and then willing. So we have to be careful as devotees to learn the process of controlling the mind. Otherwise, we'll become subject to material desires by contemplating the objects of the senses. The verse says, Sangat sanjayate kama. Kama means desire. Desire forms from association. We have to be very careful who we associate with and what we associate with. Because if you don't associate with the right people and the right things, your mind will become disturbed. And Prabhupada says in the purport, the senses require real engagements. And if they are not engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, they will certainly seek engagement in the service of materialism. A sincere devotee shuns all material sense enjoyment due to his higher taste for spiritual enjoyment in the association of the Lord. That is the secret of success. Prabhupada says the secret of success. We have to shun all material sense enjoyment. And develop a taste for spiritual enjoyment. I was mentioning this on the weekend we held a retreat on the weekend, and I was mentioning this to some of the participants that Utsahan in Sanskrit refers to enjoyment. It refers to enthusiasm. We have to, in order to be successful in spiritual life, you have to be enthusiastic. How do you become enthusiastic? Right? You become enthusiastic when we experience pleasure. So we have to learn to experience pleasure in Krishna consciousness, in devotional service. Because if we experience pleasure in devotional service, we will give up our attachment and pleasure in this world. We will give it up. So we have to experience pleasure, right? Because if we don't get enjoyment from devotional life, from devotional activities and devotional service, we will look for pleasure in the outside world, in the material world. So it is essential for devotees to get pleasure, to get enjoyment from devotional activities. Prabhupada says in the purport, one who is not therefore in Krishna consciousness, however powerful he may be in controlling the senses by artificial repression, is sure ultimately to fail. For the slightest thought of sense pleasure will agitate him to gratify his desires. And we've given the example of Sabari Muni. There are other personalities. They fell down. Haridas Thakur did not fall down. Even when he was tempted by a prostitute, by Maya herself, he did not fall down. He did not leave devotional service. So we also have to come to that platform. We do not leave devotional service. Text 63. From anger, complete delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So, text 63, Prabhupada says, a devotee knows that Krishna is the supreme enjoyer and that he accepts all that is offered to him in devotion. So after offering something to the Lord, the devotee takes the remnants called prasadam. Thus, everything becomes spiritualized and there is no danger of fall down. This is how we engage our senses in the service of Krishna. We offer everything to Krishna. We have to eat every day. So therefore, we offer the food, the bhoga, to Krishna. Krishna enjoys the bhoga, the offering. And then once Krishna has enjoyed the offering, we take the remnants, which is called prasadam. And prasadam, that is enjoyed by the devotee, but it is secondary enjoyment. And this is very important to understand. As devotees, we have to enjoy things secondarily. We can't enjoy things primarily. It has to be secondarily. That's a very important point. So you remember back earlier that Arjuna asked Krishna 4 questions. Someone who's transcendental, how does he speak? What is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk? So Krishna has just finished in these series of verses we've read tonight. Krishna is answering, how does he sit? In other words, what is someone's consciousness, a devotee's consciousness, while his senses are not engaged in the outside world? In other words, while one's doing one's sadhana, one's hearing and chanting, reading, chanting japa and so forth, then one's senses are not being engaged in the outside world. What is his consciousness like? So that's being answered here. Now we'll begin to hear about the final question that Arjuna asked. How does he walk? Or in other words, what is a devotee's consciousness like when he's engaged in this world? So now this will be answered in verses 64 and up until 71. Sorry, 71. Krishna will answer this question of Arjuna. Text number 64. But a person free from all attachment and aversion and able to control his senses through regulative principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. There's another quite well-known verse. And Prabhupada coins this phrase, regulative principles of freedom. As we've discussed, sometimes people, they ask, what do you do for pleasure? You don't eat meat, you don't have illicit sex, you don't take intoxication, you don't gamble. What do you do for pleasure? And a devotee always thinks that I'm receiving superior pleasure by the regulative principles of freedom, by not engaging in, when we take initiation, we vow, I won't have illicit sex, intoxication, gambling, and meat eating. So these are regulative principles. We regulate ourselves, we control ourselves, but it leads to freedom. It releases the soul from the bondage of his bondage in this material world. So these are regulative principles of freedom. In the purport, Prabhupada says, one may externally control the senses by some artificial process, but unless the senses are engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is every chance of a fall. But Prabhupada keeps reiterating this point as he goes through this section. Right? He mentions it again and again and again. We can only control our senses when they're engaged in Krishna's service. Prabhupada says in the purport, to act or not to act is within the devotee's control because he acts only in the direction of Krishna. This consciousness is the causeless mercy of the Lord, which the devotee can achieve in spite of his being attached to the sensual platform. This is the secret of the Krishna consciousness movement. That a devotee can control his senses. Why? Because they are engaged in the service of the master of the senses. They're engaged in the service of Krishna. Okay. Text number 65. For one thus satisfied in Krishna consciousness, the threefold miseries of material existence exist no longer. In such satisfied consciousness, one's intelligence is soon well established. And I'll read 66 also. One who is not connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, for which there is no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? So in the purport, Prabhupada says, when one is certain that Krishna is the enjoyer, proprietor, and friend of everyone and everything, then one can, with a steady mind, bring about peace. So this verse is from chapter 5, that Prabhupada is quoting, of the Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada calls it the peace formula, which has three elements, as Prabhupada summarizes here. We understand that Krishna is the enjoyer, Krishna is the proprietor, and Krishna is the friend of every living entity. When you understand these 3 points, Krishna is the enjoyer, the proprietor, and the friend of every living entity, then you become peaceful. Everyone wants peace in this world, but that's the only way to become peaceful in this world. Prabhupada also says, if one is not in Krishna consciousness, there cannot be a final goal for the mind. Disturbance is due to want of an ultimate goal. This is Prabhupada's wisdom. He's pointing this out to us, that if we don't have a final goal or an ultimate goal, you're never going to be satisfied. And you see humans all over the world, people all over the world are not happy and satisfied. Why are people not happy? Why are people not satisfied in this material world? People are not happy and they're not satisfied. Why is that? Because they don't have an ultimate goal. When you have the ultimate goal of life, to become a devotee of Krishna, then you become happy, then you become satisfied. Otherwise, always feel empty. So many people in this world, they feel empty because they don't have an ultimate goal, they don't have an ultimate satisfaction. Okay, text number 67. As a boat on water is swept away by a strong wind, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. Prabhupada says in the purport, all the senses must be engaged in Krishna consciousness, for that is the correct technique for controlling the mind. And of all the senses, it is said, the tongue, jiva, is the most difficult to control of all. Ataha Shri Krishna namadi nabhave grayam indriyai. Seva mukhi hi jivado swayameva sparatyata. The tongue is the most difficult of all the senses to control. As Rupa Goswami points out in the Nectar of Devotion, jiva vega, udaropasta vega. If the tongue is not controlled, it'll be hard to control the belly. And if the belly is not controlled, it'll be hard to control the genitals. So the tongue is pivotal. It's the most difficult of the senses to control. How do we control the tongue? By always honoring Krishna's prasadam and by speaking about topics related to Krishna. That's how the tongue becomes controlled. So that is our meditation, to control the senses, to control the tongue in the service of Krishna. Okay. Text number 68. Therefore, O mighty armed, one whose senses are restrained from their objects is certainly of steady intelligence. Prabhupada says in the purport, as enemies are curbed by superior force, The senses can similarly be curbed, not by any human endeavor, but only by keeping them engaged in the service of the Lord by means of Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada makes this point again and again. And Krishna is making this point. It's very difficult to control the mind and the senses. Therefore, they must be used in Krishna's service. They must be engaged in Krishna's service. And Prabhupada says, one who has understood that only by Krishna consciousness is one really established in intelligence, and that one should practice this art under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, is called a sadhaka, or a suitable candidate for liberation. This is a sadhaka. A sadhaka means a suitable candidate for liberation. Someone who acts under the guidance of the spiritual master. This is how we become perfect in Krishna consciousness, according to Nectar of Devotion. Ado, Guru Pada Shraya. You take shelter of the spiritual master. By taking shelter of the spiritual master, then you can perfect your life in devotional service. Text number 69. There's another famous verse. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-controlled, and the time of awakening for all beings is night for the introspective sage. Also a well-known verse. Prabhupada says in the purport, the introspective man goes on with his self-realization activities undisturbed by materialistic happiness and distress. So I think I've told the story a number of times that many years ago, I used to live for 7 years. I was living just 2 minutes walk from the temple in Melbourne, in Albert Park, in Little Page Street. And I got up for Mangalati. It was 4:30 in the morning, and I was just about to walk to the temple. And I came out of my gate of my house, just ready to go down to the temple. And my next door neighbor, who I'd made friends with, he was living there in Albert Park, he wasn't a devotee. He pulled up in a taxi. So he was coming home after being out all night. I think it was Sunday morning, so he'd been out all night. He was coming home, and I was just getting up to go to the temple. So he got out of the car. He was a little intoxicated, and he said to me, "Where are you going?" So I'm going to the temple to do my meditation. He said, "You're crazy." He was just about to go to bed. I was just getting up. And I looked at him, and I didn't say anything, but we both knew what I was thinking. And Prabhupada actually wrote an essay many years ago. Who is crazy? Who is crazy? Is it the devotee of Krishna, or is it the non-devotee? As Krishna says in this verse, right? What is nighttime for the non-devotee is daytime for the devotee, and vice versa. So who's crazy? You have to take your pick. You want to hang out with the devotees, or you want to hang out with the materialists. I always say to people, our food's better. So you're better off hanging out with the devotees. And as Prabhupada said, if Krishna is God, then our life. Prabhupada said, even if Krishna is not God, still our life is better. But if Krishna is God, then our life is perfect. Okay. Text number 70. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. Prabhupada says in the purport, that is the proof of a Krishna conscious person, one who has lost all inclinations for material sense gratification, although the desires are present, because he remains satisfied in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. He can remain steady like the ocean and therefore enjoy full peace. So that is the position of the devotee. That even in the midst of this material world with so many material distractions and so many material opportunities for sense gratification, the devotee remains undisturbed because he's fixed in Krishna consciousness. Text number 71. A person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship and is devoid of false ego, he alone can attain real peace. Prabhupada says in the purport, to understand one's actual position as the eternal servitor of Krishna, without falsely claiming this material body to be oneself, and without falsely claiming proprietorship over anything in this world, is the perfect stage of Krishna consciousness. So this is the highest level of Krishna consciousness, right? One who has given up all material desires. So that's what we are aspiring for. We're aspiring to also get to the platform of giving up all material desires. Now, the final verse of the chapter tells us what will be the destination of someone who is able to fully control their material desires and to fully dedicate themselves to Krishna. That is the way of the spiritual and godly life, after attaining which a man is not bewildered. If one is thus situated, even at the hour of death, one can enter the kingdom of God. The Prabhupada says in the purport, before ending this life, if one fortunately becomes Krishna conscious, he at once attains to Brahma Nirvana. There is no difference between the kingdom of God and the devotional service. Since both are on the absolute plane, to be engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord is to have attained the spiritual kingdom. So it's a beautiful point. Prabhupada explains this is called Brahma Nirvana. Brahma Nirvana means fully entering into spiritual consciousness. And as Prabhupada says, you can be in this world, living in this world, as Jesus said. Be in the world, but not of the world. So we can be in the world, but not of it. In other words, you're so spiritually fixed in devotional service that even though while you're staying in this material world, you're actually transcendental. You're fully absorbed in the spiritual energy in serving Krishna, and therefore you are liberated from material consciousness. And you've actually already entered into the service of God, into the spiritual kingdom. At the time of death, you will enter into the spiritual kingdom. So I'll stop here. Does anyone have any questions or comments? What we have discussed tonight. So next week, we will begin chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you all for coming. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. I'll see you next week. Hare Krishna. Good to see you all.